we go. We are live. NBA Live Before Lock. Friday, September 4th. It is time to dive into this lovely two-gamer. Not too much news to wait on. Iguodala and Olynyk is pretty much it. But we're going to dig into all of it. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Greg Ehrenberg. Greg, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we've got Kelly Olynyk and Andre Iguodala both questionable. As far as playoffs go, that's kind of significant injury news just because there's kind of no other real source of value on most days. So I think that them being out, and we'll talk about it a little more, that has potential to open up, some cheap plays on the Heat. And that's kind of important on a slate like this where we have Giannis, we have Harden, LeBron, Anthony Davis. We kind of are really needing some cheap guys to roster. We just don't have it at our disposal right now.
Yeah, it's really gross. On a lot of my crunches to start the day, I was getting a lot of the pay up options, significantly more than I was expecting to get when I first ran the crunches, which means that I am dipping my toe into the water of the abyss of badness sub 4K, at least on DraftKings. I'm not excited about it, but a lot of lineups with a two-stud build. I assumed I would be looking more balanced, and I am looking way more stars and scrubs right now.
Yeah, I think it's hard to be balanced because the mid-range just isn't very good today. And the top-end guys are even per dollar, the strongest plays. Like, I think Giannis, we'll talk about Westbrook and the concerns with his ownership, but per dollar, he's a good play if he's going to play full minutes tonight. And then I still think Giannis per dollar might even be the best play on the entire slate if he's going to play close to 40 minutes, which, we're kind of at the whims of Budenholzer as far as that goes. But then we look at the cheap end. This is a good slate. Do you remember DraftKings used to do a $2,000 minimum for the playoffs? And this would have been a nice slate for that.
Ooh, could have used it. For real, could have used it. Would have been, man, I can't even, I'd be getting 3 studs at that rate. I don't think
yeah, for sure.
True, but would have been close. As you're coming in, 450-ish people, go ahead and hit that thumbs up because the more we get there, the happier No House Advantage will be for being the presenting sponsor of this show. I'll tell you a little bit more about No House Advantage as we get moving. But first, let's just dive right in. We got a lot to talk about for this slate, probably a little bit less so on Heat Bucks. So we'll start there and get it out of the way. We'll start on the Miami side. As of right now, Jimmy Butler, 25 to 30% owned across both sites. Bam, pretty chalky on FanDuel because power forward doesn't allow you to be anything other than chalky. And then Dragic is in like the 20 to 25% range. How are you feeling about the pay up options for the Heat today?
Yeah, I don't really like them all that much. Jimmy Butler is too expensive for me on both sides, especially when there's just so many other stars I want to pay up for. It was really funny because remember we were talking the other day, the narrative regarding the Bucks and Heat series was that what should the Bucks do with Jimmy Butler, right? Should Giannis guard him? How are they going to deal with that situation? Giannis didn't end up guarding him. Jimmy Butler sucked, and the Heat still won the game anyway. So it really ended up being not too important of a conversation. The issue with Jimmy Butler from game 1 of the series to game 2, well, number one, there was a big drop in usage, but also in game 1, he just made like 100% of his mid-range shots, and he's generally not a good mid-range jump shooter. And even with him hitting all those shots in that game, he scored 53 DraftKings points, which is nice, but it's not even that great of like an outcome considering what his salary is and what some of the other options are on the slate. So we consider like around 50 DraftKings points to be the upper limit of what Butler could do. It just makes him a weak play when we have all these other stars on the slate.
We're on the same page there. I don't have a ton of interest in Jimmy Butler, just given it's just, I would rather pay up further to like true DFS style studs. I think he's just a little overpriced. I don't really have much to add on the Bam ownership on FanDuel. It totally makes sense to me. I'm not really expecting to get much out of the, I guess I'll call it the big 3 for Miami, so to speak. I just don't think I'm going to be there. I think it's a lot easier to go to Crowder, Hero, Duncan Robinson. If Kelly Olynyk is in, he's 3,400. I think that he has to at least be looked at a little bit on DK. If Andre Iguodala ends up out, I think Derek Jones probably ends up way more popular than you would ever think. Flat minimum on DraftKings. What do you want to do with the rest of these guys?
So one thing with Derek Jones, I think how popular he is depends on when we get injury news on Andre Iguodala. Like if he's a true game time decision and we don't actually find out until like 6:20 or something like that, like 10 minutes before the game tips, then I don't think Derek Jones is going to be really popular because people aren't going to make those kinds of swaps last second. But if we were to get Andre Iguodala news like 5 minutes from now, then I think there's potential for Derek Jones to be a pretty popular punt play, especially considering, like I said, we have all these stars on the high end that are really good fantasy producers, and it's really difficult to fit them into lineups at the moment.
Yeah, we would need that news like now for his ownership to get really crazy. Honestly, like I hope it happens. I don't know, like 5 minutes to go.
Yeah, that would be terrific.
I would just start jamming. Although, man, that would be really tough. I don't know if I'd be able to get I don't know if I'd be able to get the crunch done time. That's the tricky part. Who's your favorite Heat play for today?
I mean, on FanDuel, it's default Bam, just because like who else are you rostering a power forward? To be more creative, if we're going down the list of plays, it's still tough without knowing the Iguodala Olynyk news, because if Iguodala is out, then it's Derek Jones. But if Iguodala and Olynyk both play, then Derek Jones probably doesn't play all that many minutes, and he's not really a good option. You mentioned Olynyk at 3,400. I think he's okay if he's playing, obviously. Last game, 16 minutes, 20 DraftKings points on a slate like this. That's really valuable. Somebody else who I think could go under the radar and has a little bit of upside if Iguodala is out, Duncan Robinson could play over 30 minutes. And generally the way the Heat have approached the rotation in the playoffs is they've been giving Duncan Robinson's minutes to Andre Iguodala. I'm not really sure why. I think they're just kind of like, hey, we traded for Andre Iguodala for the playoffs, and he's a veteran presence. For whatever that's worth, they think like, hey, this guy might not be good, but he's old. Therefore, we think he has value to our team. And they're playing him over Duncan Robinson. I like Duncan Robinson a lot. I think that his shooting is really valuable against a team like the Bucks. It's just hard to consider him unless Iguodala is out.
Yeah, he's sort of like a neutral play for me right now. But if Iggy ends up out and you can get a couple extra minutes from him, I think that really helps to pay off that salary tier. Do you have anything else you want to touch on from the Heat side of this game?
Just because we didn't mention him, Goran Dragic, he's played really well in the playoffs, and he's been a really popular play. Right now, he's not projected to be nearly as popular as he was on previous slates. Part of that is because of the pricing on Russell Westbrook and how popular it looks like Westbrook is going to be. At the price point that Dragic's now out I don't think he makes for a very strong play. I know that the Bucks have been fairly favorable against point guards for fantasy purposes, but still, this is a really expensive price for Dragic, and the shooting is going to regress. I mean, if we look at his numbers in the playoffs, he's shooting, over 50% from the field, and given the quality of the Bucks defense, I just don't expect that to hold up. And then also stands the reason that his usage is going to drop a little bit of his efficiency does.
Okay, let's head over to the Bucks side, where, I mean, your guess is as good as mine what Coach Bud decides to do here. I think we all have the same sort of thought: play the guys that are really good a lot more. I gave Giannis 37 minutes. I gave Middleton 37 minutes. I feel like I might be a little light there, but I'd rather get bit by this one, because if I start watching this game and they both play like 34 minutes, I'm going to lose my mind. How high are you willing to go for their minutes today?
Yeah, so I mean, I've said this before. I want to give them 40 minutes, but as much as I've done it, just doesn't happen. So I feel like I have to be conservative with their minutes because Budenholzer doesn't want to do it. I actually saw somebody tweeted out a quote from him earlier in the season where somebody asked him about playing starters extended minutes in the playoffs. And he said that if we have to play Giannis 40 to 41 minutes to win a playoff game, then it means we don't deserve to win it. And I was like, well, that's not a quote I want to say. So I find it very difficult to think that Giannis is going to approach 40 minutes, even though I want him to. But if there was any game where he was going to play those minutes, it would have to be now, right? The Bucks are down 2-0 in a series. They absolutely have to win. They can't fall down 3-0. But still, I'm going 38 minutes for Giannis just because unless this game goes to overtime, with the way we've seen Bud handle the rotations and some of those quotes that I've seen from him in the past, I'm just not sure that he's going to be willing to give Giannis those big minutes. Now, with that said, I still think Giannis is the number one pay-up option on the slate.
What a ridiculous quote. Do you think he's just watching that Raptors-Celtics game yesterday like, Kyle Lowry's only been on the bench for 90 seconds. They don't deserve this at all. What a preposterous thing to say.
I assume he's upset by it. I assume he's looking. Maybe he thinks it's cheating. I think he thinks the rules of basketball are nobody's allowed to play over 40 minutes. And if you play somebody with 2 fouls in the first quarter, I think he thinks it's like a technical foul or something.
Yikes. I agree. I like Giannis as a pay up option. I was a lot higher on him earlier today as we got through the day. I have him and AD pretty much neck and neck. I'm expecting to have a lot of them both, one way or the other. Middleton, I'm relatively neutral on. Eric Bledsoe is the guy that I truly like the most, but the public's already there, so it's not as if I'm beating anybody with a punch. I'm a little surprised to see Brook Lopez only at 23% ownership because I think that he can still see a couple additional minutes, played 32 the last time out. So that's probably the place that I want to go most. But unfortunately, the guy that I think I'm going to have a lot of, which makes me mostly sick to my stomach, is Wes Matthews, because I don't know what else to do to pay down. And that's one of the few spots that I expect to play, 28 plus minutes, something in that neighborhood. And he's like one of the few guys in that kind of range that's not really getting a ton of ownership.
Yeah, I was going to say somebody else. I thought you were going to say that Marvin Williams is the guy you're uncomfortable playing a lot of, because given the outlook of the slate, I think that Marvin Williams is viable, and that is an equally ugly option.
It is so ugly. And I'm with you. I'm totally with you. I mean, these are two guys that I have projected for an 11 and 10% usage rate, respectively. Not great.
No, but I mean, it's just what the opportunity cost is. And I think that I'm willing to take the punt on these guys that are probably going to score like 10 fantasy points to get up to the Giannis and AD range level players, because I think that those guys are just going to outproduce their salary by way more than those mid-range guys who are probably going to be, around what the salary-based expectation is.
Yeah, it's the lineups themselves, just like picking individual ones out of a hat, are going to look really, really problematic. It's not great.
It's going to be really funny when GPPs come down to like which guy scores like 13 fantasy points. That's min price, because that's what it's gonna be.
Yeah, I mean, let me just look at the list right now. Let's just say 3,500 and under. Like figuring out who out of like Wes Matthews, I don't know, Caruso, Olynyk, Markieff Morris, Marvin Williams, Rondo. You got like to get that guy or those two guys right feels like a full-on roll of the dice. And it's going to be probably the most important decision of the day, because anybody can be like, well, I really like LeBron James today. It's like, well, yeah, I get it.
All right. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, but there is one name that I think has the most upside under 4,000. I'm wondering if it's the same, if you think the same player, which if you had to pick one guy under 4,000, he's going to score 25 DraftKings points. Which guy do you think would be most likely to have that kind of upside?
Under 4K?
Under 4K.
KCP.
I say it's Rondo.
Oh. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
So, I mean, Rondo's a good fantasy producer, right? I mean, if we look at any of those guys under 4,000, in terms of just per minute fantasy production, Rondo is good when he's on the court. The thing is, he's just such a wild card because he hasn't played basketball, 6 months now? He had the thumb injury, then he had the back injury. Now, there's all these narratives about playoff Rondo. They're largely nonsense. However, here's what's not nonsense about it. Teams buy into it, and that means that he's generally going to play more minutes in the playoffs than you normally would want him to, because there is this idea that he's a better primetime / playoff performer. And I kind of think that's why LeBron wanted Rondo on the team also. So even though he hasn't played in a long time, I think there's a chance that he just plays at least a decent amount of minutes. And I'm not confident, but I think the upside's there. And when he's on the court, he has the ability to produce fantasy points. So even though it's a really high risk type play, I think that the reward is worth it.
I think he gets played clean off the floor when he's out there.
I do too, except that hasn't stopped teams from playing him in the past.
Also true. Right now we have him at 16% ownership on DraftKings, 11 on FanDuel. I will hate myself, but I assume I'll have a comparable amount to that. He's not going to be a guy that I am well over the field on, but he's not a guy that I'm just also ignoring. I can't. And that's just not appealing at all. I want him to be bad because I just want him to be fully off the table moving forward. I don't want to have to worry about him in games 2 through 7. I want him to get cooked bad and then never see the floor again. They should be giving those minutes to like waiters, as ridiculous as that sounds.
I mean, they should be giving the minutes to Caruso. Like, Caruso has been fine when he's on the court, but I think that Rondo is going to be ahead of Caruso in the rotation. And I think that there's a chance just when he's on the court that he could produce counting numbers. But legitimately, the ceiling floor for him is if he scores 0 fantasy points, I wouldn't be shocked either. But I just think that he's a much higher upside option compared to the other guys in that price range, just because of how he actually produces fantasy points.
One final closing thought for Miami, Milwaukee. Not thought, but who wins this game?
The Bucks. Maybe not, but my confidence hasn't wavered too much. One thing I was really surprised by is I was really prepared to bet the Bucks money line for the series after they won last game, and books still have this set as like a 50-50 series. And to me, I'm like, well, that's a little ridiculous that the Bucks were only like plus 127 or something like that on DraftKings. Like I was hoping to get like plus 200 odds or something in that range on the Bucks. And I guess there's still some optimism about them going forward because every game in this series, the Bucks are going to be favored individually. So I think they have a good chance to get back in the series. They look like they're feeling the pressure of the playoffs a little bit. And this is just kind of like an eye test type thing. But in some of these close game situations, it seems like the shot selection is not nearly as good as it should be. And just some of the play calling, the way they're running sets it's just off. And we saw a little bit of it against the Magic. I didn't mind it though, because they still end up winning those games by 14. So I didn't think it was a massive concern. But they just, I can't even put my finger on exactly what it is. They just don't look as good as they did in the regular season.
I hate it. I hate it so much. I just assume they win the series. I'm going to go down on this ship the entire way. I'm just waiting for them to get swept as 5-point favorites in 4 straight games.
I don't actually think that's going to happen. Although I can't say I would be stunned if it happened at this point either. Do you agree with me though that I don't know what it is that's off with them, but something just seems different watching them?
Yeah, I can't put my finger on it. You wouldn't expect it. All these guys have largely been on this team for a while. Like there's so much continuity. It's not like I don't think that they're prepared. They just look different. It's like they got a new controller for their video game and it's like a slightly different shape. Like their fingers aren't on the buttons correctly.
It's almost like they're pressing because like Giannis is taking like pull-up threes that we didn't see him take in the regular season. And some of them are really ugly looking. And when he does that, I'm just really confused. Why is he taking those shots that are outside of his skill set? And he seems to be forcing a lot. So I feel like it's maybe the pressure of the playoffs getting to him a little bit. But still, Giannis is so good, and the Bucks were such a good regular season team. I think that they're going to figure it out. And it's not like they got run off the court last game. I mean, they lost on a ticky-tack foul with no time left on the clock.
Yeah.
So it's a more competitive series, and I don't think there's as much cause for panic as maybe the internet and Twitter makes it seem like there is.
So Mike Campbell said, Engleman, they lose this game, Milwaukee won't be 5-point favorites next. I would be shocked if the line was anything less than Bucks -4 in game 4 if they lose today. Would you think that it would move all that much?
Probably not, just because, so there used to be something in NBA betting called zigzag theory, which was literally professional bettors would not bet the first games of series. And whatever happened in the first game, books would way overreact to it. This was like a while ago. This was like before there was legalized betting anywhere except for Las Vegas. So a team could be favored by like, let's just say 5 points the first game, and they end up losing by 10. And then the books would make like the other team the favorite. And what people would do is they would just bet based on whatever that line movement was in other directions. And then over time, just books kind of found out like, oh, this isn't a good way to line the games. Whatever we view to be the value of these teams in game 1 is what we're going to value these teams going forward for each game. So unless there's an injury or something that's like way different than what you'd normally expect, then the lines are generally going to be the same. But there was a point in time where just whoever won, it would like radically move what the lines were.
Yeah, for sure. The limits on betting on the sides of playoff games are through the roof, and books aren't moving these lines all that. Like it's going to stay right there. Or you want to tell me that it moves a half point? You want to tell me it maybe even moves a point after 3 games? I can see it. You can just be like, okay, this is not what we thought it was heading into it. But yeah, that line's not moving.
No, not in a significant way, unless there's an injury. Mike
Campbell says Bucks -2 if they go down 3-0. I would be. That would get. It would move immediately to 4. There are some people out there that would have like just staggering amounts of money on that -2 line.
Yeah, I would be shocked if the line got to -2, unless there's, like I said, a situation where they lose because Giannis gets hurt or Middleton or something like that.
Yeah, all things equal, that's not going anywhere. 1,200 concurrent viewers, 177 likes. It is now time for me to shill for likes. Hit that thumbs up. It helps us out a ton. Even subscribe to the channel, notification bell. You guys know the drill. We've got the MLB DFS live before lock show coming up immediately after this on the same stream. You don't even have to close the window. You can just stay here. So what I want to do is try to get as many likes as possible to shame them, so that they feel sad when the number doesn't move any higher at 6:30, because we're just going to corner the market on thumbs ups. So just keep smashing that thumbs up button. Don't hit it more than once, because if you already hit it, then it takes it away, and that's not as good.
Unless you want to hit it 3 times.
Yes, unless you want to hit it 3 times, at which point that's also fine by me. We also need to touch on the presenting sponsor of this show, No House Advantage. And it's a little bit different than what you're used to, because these are player prop contests. You can do them for NBA, MLB, NFL, PGA, and it's a peer-to-peer fantasy platform. You can join for free right now. You can download the app in any app store, check out the prop contest. You don't even have to deposit anything. So let's say that you're really confident that Rondo is going to go over his points props for today. You can put that prop, in your 5-point spot, and then continue to put props down the rest of your list. If you're that confident, you can rank those props. It's a really interesting mechanism. I'm really excited to build out. I have halfway done my player prop model in my workbook. So I'm ready to load all of this information in and start playing. It's such a different mechanism that I wasn't totally ready for it, but I'm really intrigued by going into player props. I really like looking at player props. I really like trying to beat them. It's one of my favorite things, hoping that my model is, better than the player prop market, which generally speaking it is, which makes me really happy and really excited to try out No House Advantage. So download the app. You can get your first deposit matched with up to $20 in a free play when you use the promo code Awesemo. And if you refer a friend, you can get another $5 after their first deposit. So go check it out right now. That's No House Advantage. They are the presenting sponsor of NBA Live Before Lock. We got to dig into Lakers and Houston. I don't know if it's just because we see so many games, like we've seen so many Game 7 series where you get kind of used to, the entire Nuggets Jazz series, or even you get used to Rockets and Thunder. Now we've just got this new one to break down, and I feel like I have no idea what's going to happen. Is there a player on the Lakers that isn't named Rajon Rondo that you think stands out that the public isn't really looking at? Obviously Rondo is like a true wild card.
Yeah, Rondo is definitely a wild card. I think that one thing that's interesting here is what are the Lakers going to do with the Rockets small ball lineups? So are the Lakers going to play small, or are they still going to give JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard the regular minutes here? And it's hard to know. I mean, we're going to have a much clearer picture heading into Game 2. I think that there is some reason to be optimistic about Dwight Howard's production when he is on the court. So I think that he's somebody who, if you're just looking for a one-off with potential upside who isn't Rajon Rondo, I think Dwight Howard's a guy who could score a lot of fantasy points in a hurry against the small Rockets front court.
Yeah, I'm going to end up with a bunch of Dwight Howard today.
Oh, interesting to see you're on the same page as me. I was thinking after Rondo, I didn't think there would be a take that was wilder than that, and I thought maybe it was Dwight Howard, and apparently agree with that. 10%
owned. We're talking about a guy that's north of a fantasy point per minute. So if he plays, like, even if he just plays the normal way he's been playing in the playoffs, even just say like 17, 18 minutes, that's a really nice base. And this should be about as advantageous of a rebounding matchup as he's going to find.
Yeah.
I love the idea of him being on the floor every time that James Harden comes off the floor. If I'm the Lakers, one of those centers is on the court no matter what when Russell Westbrook is running this team. You want a big rim protector in there, and if he wants to shoot feel free. The floor is yours, Russ. If you want to go back to being old Russ in that case, knock yourself out. There is so much size on the Lakers that I think this is a really, really tough spot for Russ, because I can see him in this sort of spot reverting to his old self. If he keeps being the Russ that we got from like January on, where he stopped shooting threes and tried to be a more efficient offensive player, that's great. I don't think that he's going to like what he finds when he gets into the paint, and I think that might make him bring out some bad habits. So for right now, Dwight Howard is looking like the value play that I like the most relative to where the public is. And not fun.
Let me tell you the other reason that I like Dwight Howard, because you mentioned the ownership there and relative to the public. Where the public's going here is Markieff Morris. And I think that there is some logic to him. And I would have liked Markieff Morris more had I not looked at the ownership and saw that he was over 30% projected ownership on DraftKings. And so what this is going to come down to is how are the Lakers going to run their rotations, right? Because if they go big with JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard, then that kind of marginalizes Markieff Morris. Now, if they go small to match up with the Rockets, then Markieff Morris is going to play a bunch of minutes, and that's going to marginalize JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard. However, if you're going to have Dwight Howard exposure, that's kind of a natural pivot off of Markieff Morris and where his ownership is.
Yeah. I set a max. Maybe I didn't set that rule. Now you're making me. I'm curious about what I did set, because I set something like in that vein. Okay, so sort of. I set a max 2 of Dwight, JaVale, and AD for this lineup, because I clearly don't want all three. Don't even. AD have power forward? Has to, right?
Yeah, he's power forward center on DraftKings.
Either way, I mean, because like JaVale's probably going to come out as like a per dollar value play in 12 or 13 minutes, just how ugly this slate looks. Definitely don't want to get a lot of those guys, but it's not going to matter for me if Dwight Howard ends up at 10% ownership. Like he's going to be in a lot of my lineups, and that's terrifying. Absolutely, truly terrifying.
I also think with Dwight Howard, unless they literally just phase him out of the lineup entirely, I think there's probably a higher floor there than we would perceive for a low minutes guy, just because he's such a good per minute fantasy producer, even at this point in his career, and especially against such a small Rockets front court, that if he plays 10 minutes, like I would be shocked if he scores less than like 8 fantasy points or something like that. And
I wouldn't know. I don't even understand how he could. The Rockets would just have to be shooting the lights out.
So any minutes that Dwight Howard gets, he's going to score at least around a fantasy point per minute. So even if he ends up only playing like 12 minutes, and keep in mind, he played 19 minutes per game in the regular season. If he gets really reduced in his role and he plays a dozen minutes this game, I mean, I would still think he has somewhat of a chance to put up an okay fantasy score. He actually played decent minutes in the series against the Blazers. I mean, look at the last 4 games. He played 20, 24, 17, and 19 minutes. Now, obviously, that's a much bigger team than what the Rockets have. But the question is, do the Lakers continue to just play their lineups as is, or do they do something to counteract what the Rockets are doing?
Yeah, I'm hoping he is out there. I think that if the Rockets are having a rough shooting day, that benefits him even more. That's just more and more defensive rebound opportunities for him. It just seems like a fantastic opportunity given this matchup. I think they're better off if they're playing big, and I'm anxious to see if that's the direction they go. I guess we need to touch on it now. Do you have a preference between AD? Give me it on FanDuel. Give me it on DraftKings.
On FanDuel, I kind of think it has to be AD just because of the positional scarcity. And then I'm more inclined to go LeBron on DraftKings just because I think that both of them are viable options. And if I'm going to get exposure to AD on FanDuel, then I want to get exposure to DraftKings. I want to get exposure to LeBron. It just makes more sense on DraftKings. That's kind of where I stand. I think both of them are about comparable plays.
Yeah, I have AD by a hair on both sites, but nothing too crazy. I'm expecting to get just a bunch of both of them. Unless we see the ownership rise pretty significantly, I'm kind of just punting James Harden. So maybe we can go to that direction. How are you feeling about Harden in this spot?
1 second, because I just saw this come across. So Kelly Olynyk is out. Andre Iguodala is in.
Okay.
So do you want to backtrack and go to that, and then we can hit?
Yeah, we don't have much of a choice here now, do we? I'm just gonna export this 1500 lineup crunch that I have right now, just in case, and then delete it. And I do want to touch on one thing quickly. We got the super chat from El Negro Loco, RIP to Uncle DFS. He was a subscriber of Awesemo.com for, I think, since the beginning. So, we're talking like 2 years. Really great member of our Slack community. We found out earlier today that he passed away. So thoughts go out to his family. Real sad day because he was a really good guy. Really loved his interactions. Anytime there was any Slack drama, he was the first guy dropping in with the popcorn emoji. So RIP to Uncle DFS. And thanks to Cameron Dickinson. He said, Josh, you're my MLB. I appreciate that. How popular or how much do you like Derek Jones Jr. now? Or does this just make you want to go nuts onto Duncan Robinson? Do you think that Olynyk not being there can slide everybody up a spot?
It's hard to say because I was way more interested if Iguodala was out. So this was the worst case scenario. I feel like is Olynyk out and Iguodala playing. Because I kind of thought Olynyk was an okay value play if he was in. So I'm just bringing this up right now. I don't really think this helps Duncan Robinson. I guess Derek Jones is viable because he's probably going to play, 12 to 15 minutes or something like that. He played 7 minutes last game, except obviously those injuries didn't happen until later on in the game. So I think there's some interest in Derek Jones. I wouldn't go crazy with him, though. I think that he's just somebody to be mixed in amongst the value plays.
Is it possible that we just get 11 minutes of Myers Leonard?
Yes, and that's the big fear.
Somebody's got to back up Bam. I know Jay Crowder's been playing a couple minutes as the 5 so far in this series. Nothing too crazy, but I don't think that that's going to be what they're going to fully, although it would be an interesting construction for it. But I think that seeing Myers Leonard just sort of soak up the Kelly Olynyk time will buy them enough run so that he can just sort of trot out there as a center. I don't think I don't see a huge difference by doing that. I'm going to give him minutes. I don't.
Yeah, I think he sees the court now. Don't forget he started earlier in the year. Yeah. So it's not like
he started most of the year.
Yeah. It actually is a little weird the way the Heat have run the rotations in terms of at one point they started Kendrick Nunn and Myers Leonard and just neither of them are really part of the playoff rotation.
It is kind of nuts, right? I trust Spo more than anything, though. There's a reason for him doing it, and it's clearly working so far. Why is this not showing up? 10 minutes, Myers Leonard. Yeah, why are you not showing up in this little table, guy?
What's the difficulty?
What is my filter set at? Greater than 10 minutes. You need to be greater than or equal to 10 minutes, and that will make there's Kendrick Nunn, there's Korver, Derek Jones, Myers Leonard. That'll work. Okay, now I'm feeling good. Do you want any shares of Derek Jones or Myers Leonard?
Derek Jones, yes. Myers Leonard, no. It's just so hard for me to trust a guy who's literally played 0 minutes in recent playoff games.
Man, I don't know if I hate it, but I think that's some really, really ridiculous trying to get too cute move.
So let's see. Myers Leonard has played. Yeah, he's played. Is that against the? Okay, so yeah, he's played 0 minutes in the playoffs. I saw one game where he played 28 minutes against the Pacers. So that was end of the regular season game. That wasn't a playoff game. And the other thing too is you look at his per minute production during the year. As a starter, he played 20 minutes per game and averaged 15 DraftKings points. So that is pretty weak per minute production. And then I think we also have to consider that he hasn't played basketball in a game that matters in, I don't even know how long now. It's been since February. So it would be really tough for me to think that he would just slide in and even be able to play at the same production he had earlier in the year, which already wasn't all that great. So for that reason, I don't really have interest in Myers Leonard. I think that Derek Jones is the one cheap guy worth going to here.
Yeah. There's also Chris Silva to think about. The boss man himself, Alex Baker, just swung into chat and said Solomon Hill could potentially see the floor. I think that is also feasible. I'm not entirely sure I'm confident in any of those options, but I do think it makes Derek Jones's like 7 or 8 minutes a little bit more secure. Does this make you like Bam at all more?
I mean, it was hard to like Bam more on FanDuel than
Right.
we already liked him because it's just like, who else are you going to roster at power forward? Which, I mean, we could talk about that too. Look at the power forward options on FanDuel. There's Anthony Davis, Bam Adebayo, Robert Covington. I mean, outside of those three, is there anybody you're really considering rostering? Like, I feel like that you just by what's available, you have to play a ton of those guys.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that I have to make many changes here, other than the fact that I will, not have Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah, that's of the sub 4K options, Kelly Olynyk has now become the least appealing, and he still might score the same fantasy points as some of the other guys that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Do you want to talk anything else about this Miami-Milwaukee game now that we got that news? I don't think there's much else to add at this point.
I mean, we could touch on Iguodala. He's 3,500, and people have been playing a crap ton of Andre Iguodala in recent games.
We have him projected for 15% ownership on our last run. We'll see where that goes now that the news is official. I would prefer to have 0 shares of him. He has been a non-existent player. They'd be better off running me out there.
I wouldn't go that far. I will say they'd be better off.
You don't know my game, man.
I will say they'd be better off running more Duncan Robinson, which doesn't really seem to be in the cards. I think it's okay to have some exposure to Andre Iguodala just because the other options in this price range are so terrible anyway that at least Andre Iguodala, I mean, he has scored at least 10 DraftKings points in 5 straight playoff games. And who knows, maybe 10 to 12 fantasy points ends up being a good outcome in that price range on this slate. So I don't think that 0 of him is warranted, but I don't think a ton of him is warranted either.
I would rather have 0 than whatever the public is ending up at, though. I think I can safely say that.
Let's see, where is it now?
I mean, if we had him at 15 before, I'm pulling it up now just to see if we got another update. Last update was 17 minutes ago, so we'll probably see another one shortly, but it's not going to go down. He's at 9 now.
Still, I mean, that's still a low enough number that I think he's worth getting exposure to.
Okay, so let's say that he is at 9. What do you think is more likely? Do you take his fantasy points over under his ownership?
At 9, I would go over because he scored over 9 in every playoff game so far.
Okay,
and he's absolutely sucked. Like, he can't be worse than what he's been, and he scored over 9 in all his games. Now, if his ownership gets up to 15%, that's where it gets dicey on the over under for points versus ownership.
Oh, it's a tricky one, man. It's a tricky one. We would love to see it climb so that we can shame the MLB guys for not being able to make any headway on it.
Monopolizing the likes. I like it.
Absolutely. We got to get back to Lakers Rockets.
Westbrook time.
Is it?
It's time to talk about him because
that I agree with.
Because he's going to be maybe the most popular play on the slate, depending on site. I mean, he's going to be popular on both sites, but he's going to be especially popular on FanDuel.
He is going to be very popular on FanDuel. I don't like him either way. Do you like him today? Like, if at 60% ownership, are you saying over that number, with that number, or I would like to come in less than that number, but he still looks good?
Yeah, so per dollar, if it was just in a vacuum, yes, I would like him. I don't like him at 60% ownership, though. And what is he at now? Now he's at 50% on FanDuel and 33% on DraftKings. That's not too terrible, actually, but I still think I'd be more inclined to go under the number than over it. I was really hoping yesterday when I was writing about these games, I just assumed that people weren't going to really play Russell Westbrook that much. And then that just ended up not being the case when the ownership numbers came out. It's always hard when I'm writing about the games a day in advance to really know what the ownership's going to be. And I just kind of make predictions and end up being really wrong about ownership sometimes 24 hours in advance. But either way, so let's talk about the positives of Russell Westbrook.
Sure.
As bad as he can be on the court at times, he generally produces fantasy points anyway. So the first 3 playoff games he's played in, he scored a fantasy point per minute despite playing about as bad as Russell Westbrook can possibly play. And this has led to the lowest price point we've seen on him that I could ever remember on both sites. I don't ever remember a sub 9K Russell Westbrook. So the positive is just that he's very cheap. I assume there would be some recency bias, which is apparently not the case because everybody's rostering him anyway. And that he's still a good fantasy producer. Now, the downside is the Lakers have a very good defense. It's a tough matchup for point guards. And we don't know for sure if Westbrook has a minutes restriction or not.
I'm giving him 33 minutes right now. Are you going higher than that number?
Yeah, I have him at 36. And here's why.
Okay.
If we look at his last 3 playoff games, 24 minutes, 27 minutes, 34 minutes. So it's all been trending upward, and it's hard for me to expect anything other than him playing at least the same amount of minutes as last game. So since he played 34 in Game 7 against the Rockets, against the Thunder, I just assume that his minutes go up a little bit. I don't think this would be a situation where they push him to play like 40 in a competitive game or anything like that, which Harden could do. Yeah. But I do have him projected really well. I have him projected as one of the best per dollar plays on the slate. I just also view that there is downside there, and the ownership is super high. So I think that would be unwise to go with 0% of him, just because I think the chance of having a really good game is still pretty high.
Yeah, my only concern with his minutes are in a Game 7, I think you kind of just stop caring. There doesn't look like there's no long term to it any longer. So I can see him playing a little bit more in Game 7 and then them walking him back a bit, and potentially like Austin Rivers just picking up an extra 2 or 3 minutes instead. That's giving me a little bit of pause. If it's Russell Westbrook, I'm assuming that he just goes out there like a madman. But more than anything, I really and truly just hate this matchup so much for him that on FanDuel, I wouldn't even be remotely close to that 60% number. That's just ludicrous. 50 now. That's just ludicrous to me.
So the issue also with the FanDuel ownership is there's just other point guards I like. I want to get exposure to Eric Bledsoe. And just if there's other guys you like, you just can't play them if you're playing as much Russell Westbrook as the field is.
Here's one question for you. So we've got Russ at 8,600, Jimmy Butler 8,300, Chris Middleton 8,200 on DraftKings. Rank those 3 guys for me, in your opinion.
So it was Westbrook, Middleton, and...
Westbrook, Butler, and Middleton are the 3 guys before you take that gigantic leap up to AD.
All right, so here's the... I go Westbrook 1, Butler 2, Middleton 3. But here's still the issue, though, is I'd rather just go up to the more expensive guys.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not terribly enamored with Butler or Middleton either. I do have them in the opposite order. I have it Middleton, Butler, Westbrook. So obviously that's how you land on my sort of thought process for these guys. I am not going to have much, and the more likely scenario is that I come in here with a full-on goose egg of Russell Westbrook. But it's because I'm going to end up with 2x the field of Giannis, LeBron, and AD. It's not like I'm just going to like his peers in his salary tier. I'm going fully all the way up to the guys that are, in my opinion, a step above him.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was what I said about it too. Like the issue I had with, you asked me to compare him to Butler and Middleton. They're just 2 plays I don't like for this slate either. So right. It's kind of like, here's a guy who I like that's going to be super chalky, and then 2 guys who I just don't like at all. So I think that with Westbrook, it just makes sense, at least the way I'm viewing it, is I'm not going to take as hard of a stand as you are. Is I think Westbrook's a good play, but I just don't want as much of as the field has of him. All
right, start sifting through the rest of this Rockets team while we have 15 minutes left to go before lock. So if you don't have your lineups in now, you need to start hustling. Eric Gordon, Robert Covington, who had just a monster Game 7, PJ Tucker, Jeff Green, Daniel House. Who are the guys standing out most to you in that extra Rockets area? Who stands out?
It's so tough because because this is another spot where I really don't like any of them, and they're not that cheap either, right? So I would rather just punt with some of the cheap guys from the other games, and I think this is just a range of players I'm not going to have that much exposure to. Covington is the most interest kind of by default because I think that, like we saw with last game, he has a chance to play really well. And he's maybe, I have to look at the entire price range for all 4 players. He might be the only guy in that, him and Eric Bledsoe are the only guys that even exist in that price range on the entire slate. and Brooke Lopez.
I'm looking at it now. I mean, I really like Bledsoe in that range. I really like Lopez in that range. Gordon's probably the guy that gets pinched for me in that section.
It's a price range that doesn't really exist on DraftKings today.
Yeah. Do you think Jeff Green gets more minutes here?
No.
Given his size? Yeah, so I did earlier today, and then I listened to Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue talk, and as I was pulling out of the grocery store, Nate was just like, I don't think Jeff Green's going to be on the floor as much for this series, and I was just like, shit. I had to immediately come in here and like adjust my depth chart minutes.
He can't even be on the floor that much less than he was last game. I'm still confused. I don't know why he was playing so many minutes at the start of the playoffs, because I always thought that should have been Robert Covington, because I mean, they gave up a lot of capital to land Covington, which you would assume was because they want to play him a bunch in the playoffs. And then it just didn't happen in the first few games. I was like, that's really weird. And then once we saw that game 6 against OKC where Jeff Green played, was it 17 minutes and Covington played all the minutes, I just assumed like, all right, Jeff Green's dead to this team unless Covington gets into foul trouble.
Yeah, for some reason, I just felt like his size was going to be a little bit more helpful here. But if I'm listening to that podcast and they don't think that's the case, then I should probably not think that's the case, because those guys know a lot more about this shit than I do.
I mean, the other thing too is Jeff Green just not that good.
Also true.
So
I think he's good on the Rockets, though. Well, maybe good's not the right word. I think Jeff Green is better in this scenario than he generally is on other teams.
Sure. I still don't think he's any better than like Daniel House or Eric Gordon or any of those other wing players, though, that could come out and hit shots. I mean, I guess he has some utility just as a guy who can make corner threes, but he's not a good defensive player. And I mean, you have Robert Covington, who's like an all defensive team player. So there just isn't a scenario to me where it makes sense for Jeff Green to play minutes over Covington unless Covington's in like ridiculous foul trouble, which he does do from time to time. And he's probably going to have to check Anthony Davis and LeBron James at times during the series. And I'm sure there's going to be a game or two where Covington gets into foul trouble. But unless that's the case, Jeff Green's just not going to play.
Yeah, I think I'm with you here. 7% ownership is the only piece that's like making me interested in a large field GPP, but it's going to be a pretty tough sell. Ooh, that's a lot of AD and a lot of Giannis. Yikes. Ooh, that's a lot of really crappy dudes at the bottom of this list. Yikes again.
So getting back to Jeff, one final thought on Jeff Green. The ownership is, like you said, it's really low. I would be more inclined to play him if, one, he wasn't only center eligible on DraftKings, because that stinks. And then also if he wasn't 4,500. So as bad as he was the last couple of games, his price point didn't really move.
I did hope when I woke up this morning that he tumbled a bit in price, and that was not the case.
No.
Oh my God, so much KCP.
Or why not just give him power forward eligibility? Like, why is he only center on DraftKings?
It's insane, right? There's not no one should have center eligibility from the stupid Rockets.
No, and instead it's how many players on this team have center eligibility? I mean, fine, give center eligibility to PJ Tucker.
Yeah, they either should all have it or no one should have it.
Yeah, why isn't Daniel House center eligible?
Yeah, some of these guys should just have like a question mark for their position. They can just go in.
Robert Covington should have center eligibility if Jeff Green does.
G/F/C for Covington. Dude, I have some truly, truly disgusting people at the bottom of this. Whew. Oh my God. How much KCP is too much KCP? Asking for a friend.
I'm going to assume that you're the friend.
I am the friend.
At 3,800, I don't mind KCP. I think that he's one of the higher upside, not necessarily higher upside, but higher floor guys underneath 4,000, because he's playing over 20 minutes relatively consistently. Look at his production in the series against the Blazers, 20, 19, 15, 28 DraftKings points. So I think realistically, he's going to score double-digit points. And like we've said about other guys, I'm not all that confident that's the case for a lot of these guys under 4K. So I think that he's viable. I wouldn't play him I wouldn't play him in like 30% of lineups or anything, which based on
good. I'm not playing him in 30% of my lineups either.
What are you playing him in 40%?
Keep going.
Yeah, that's a little steep for me.
That's a very reasonable take to have. Is there anybody you're getting a lot of that you're a little surprised about?
No, because I mean, I'm intentionally trying to not go too heavy on any one guy who's in the sub 4K range. I just don't want to, I'm not confident enough to be highly invested in any of these guys. Like I just have all of them capped at 20% because there's no point where I want to look at my lineups and say my night was made or broken based on Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or Rajon Rondo.
Well, my night can certainly be made or broken based on Kentavious Caldwell. Here's the deal. If two studs go crazy, then I'm cool with having that much, like, because I'm going to need it one way or the other. I now have a really staggering amount of AD and a pretty sizable amount of Giannis and a neutral to the field amount of LeBron James. Although I guess I should be checking to see if we did get an ownership update. Last update was 9 minutes ago. So let me toss that in here just to see how it changes. But yeah, I'm betting big on AD and Giannis.
So that will include the Iguodala news. I mean, Iguodala is still only 10.6% owned. So I'm going over on the points to ownership on Iguodala.
I'm looking at it now.
10.6%. Over under.
I have him projected for, where is he? I have him projected for 8.4, so I'll take the under.
Oof. How many minutes did you give him?
15.
Yeah, I think he plays more than 15 minutes. He only played 11 last game, except he left early with an injury. I mean, the games before that, like game 1 against the Bucks, he played 19 minutes. And then against the Pacers, he played 26, 27, 28, and 25 minutes. I would be, unless he's really hampered by that injury, which was an ankle sprain from last game, which is possible, right? This could be a spot where they're just playing him because they like having a spread. Like he doesn't bring anything when he's on the court anyway. I don't even know if it matters if he's healthy or hurt.
Exactly.
But just based on what he's played so far, I would be pretty surprised if he only plays 15 minutes unless the ankle is a real issue.
Well, either way, even if I give him 2 or 3 more at a half fantasy point per minute, I'm still going to be coming. Like it's going to be even action on both sides of that bet.
It's a good line.
It is. It is a good line. It shouldn't be. That's gross. The worst part of it is that like we're projecting him for essentially 10.5 fantasy points and thinking like, you probably need a little bit of ownership to that. That should be like, he shouldn't even make the player pool in a regular season game for that kind of projection.
No, but I mean, we look at some of the players around him and like how much more confident are we in some of these other cheap guys that we've talked about, like Marvin Williams and Rajon Rondo. I mean, these guys are all going to get ownership too. And I don't think that they're any significantly better or worse than what Iguodala is. That's why I just think it makes sense to mix and match some of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to go the other direction and just concentrate the entire way. At least today, that's very much what's happening. I have a lot of Wes Matthews. I have it's basically KCP, Caruso, Wes Matthews, a little underweight to Markieff Morris, and neutral to Marvin Williams. I don't really have any of these other goons from 4K down. Rondo's at 20% right now. That's too much, right? Like there's too much ambiguity in his performance for tonight for him to be 20% owned.
That number was a lot lower than we looked at it before.
It was 9 when a half hour ago when we talked about it.
Yeah, I mentioned Rondo's name and his ownership goes through the roof.
Look at you. Man, people are going to be freaked out. Premium subs are going to be so mad we're giving away the goods on Live Before Lock. But I'm mad at it. You guys got to hit that thumbs up, man. 389 is shameful business from the YouTube chat today.
Nobody played Lou Dort the other day when I was singing the praises of Mr. Lugan's Dort the other day.
Yeah, if you guys weren't listening for that one, you should have been, because you could have had an overwhelming amount of Lou Dort on his explosion.
You know what's funny? My brother heard me say the name Lugan's Dort and he asked me if that was an anime character.
I mean, it's, I get where he's coming from. It's not a traditional name in athletics. He's going to be so good, isn't he?
If nobody defends him for the rest of his career, then I think he has a chance to be a really good offensive player.
But so that's like the interesting piece. if he starts getting defended, I assume it's because he became a better 3-point shooter. Does that make him worse then?
Well, here's
like, is it self-fulfilling?
Yes, to an extent, but also the way that he was being defended by the Rockets was really stupid because it wasn't just they were leaving him open. It got to a point where it was so obviously their game plan that people were like afraid to guard him. Like people weren't.
They were just like, ugh.
Like there was points where he would go take shots, like the ball would be passed to him, they'd start running back on offense the other way. It's like, all right, we're getting a little too extreme here. Give him a little bit more respect than that.
Just got a message in YouTube chat. Josh, what happened to your Caruso ownership? Nothing. It's higher than I want it to be.
So for me,
I'm okay with that since I have no Rondo. I think they run hand in hand.
I don't like Caruso with Rondo back. I think Rondo's ahead of him on the depth chart.
Ooh.
That's what it was all regular season.
Sure.
That's what it was all regular season when Rondo was there. And like I said, teams are still willing to run Rondo out there at this point in his career, no matter how poorly he plays. And there's always just going to be that narrative there around him that he's a good playoff performer, even though he's only played in like 13 playoff games over the last 10 years. There's still this idea like, hey, how good is Rondo in the playoffs? Like, I don't know. He doesn't play in his teams don't make the playoffs. How do we know that he's really that? How do we know that he's really that good of a playoff performer when he hasn't been in the playoffs in years? Now he was very good in the playoffs with the Celtics, but that was so long ago.
It was 2008.
Yeah, it was very long ago.
I mean, I think we're on the same page here in that, like, you kind of want to have one or the other. Not the best spot to have both of those guys. So, like,
no, definitely not in the same lineup either.
Yeah. Oh no, not at all. If Caruso and Rondo play enough minutes that both of them become viable, I either assume that the Lakers won by 50 or lost by 50.
It's not going to be close. If there is one game that ends in a blowout, it would be the Lakers blowing out the Rockets. Because I think I've mentioned this a few times. The Rockets' strategy in this series, it's going to just be to shoot like 60 to 70 threes per game. And there's going to be some games where they just don't make them and they just get absolutely destroyed.
I'm going to say something now, and it's probably not going to pay off. I don't have him. I didn't project him in. Don't be surprised to see Dion Waiters in this series. Just going to put that out there right now.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised, but I don't think it's likely he is fantasy relevant either.
Also true. I think they might need like the size of his body, as weird as that sounds. Because I think that Harden is just going to see Rondo come onto the floor and be like, oh, this is going to be fantastic.
Did he get any minutes towards the tail end of the last series? Like, I think weren't they playing like J.R. Smith ahead of him?
I'm pulling it up now. So JR got 7 minutes and 17 minutes in their final two games. Waiters did not play in the final game, played 14 the game previous to that. JR played 8 3 games ago. Waiters, nothing. They can't go to JR here.
No, but I mean, how much? They're both terrible. It doesn't matter.
Also true. KCP will have at least 25 points. R. Stanley, I've never wanted someone to be more right in my life. And we locked.
The things we get excited about at this point in the season.
Guys, thank you for joining us for this lovely NBA Live Before Lock. We are going to turn this bad boy over to the MLB Live Before Lock crew. You don't have to go anywhere. If you're playing MLB tonight, just stay on this link. They'll be popping up right as Greg and I leave. Greg, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I hope that there's a couple sub 4 players that score like 18 fantasy points, and I hope it's not the ones that are popular.
There you go. Thanks, guys. 433 likes. Let's see what you can do, MLB show. You're up. We out of here. R.I.P. Unc.
It is MLB Live Before Lock Time right here at Awesemo.com. Of course, I am Jason Floyd. As always on Fridays, I've got Geoff and Terry with me. And I hear the challenge by Josh Engleman. So let's start smash those likes. Let's get those likes up here. Let's try and match what they did on NBA Live Before Lock. Fellas, how y'all doing on this Friday afternoon?
I'm pretty good, Jace. I assume Geoff is out there with us. I can't see him on Zoom for some reason unless I click around, but there he is. I see his smile. Now what's going on?
I'm here. Don't worry.
So what's happening? How's everything going?
Not too bad. I mean, long weekend coming up. Got some pretty interesting pitchers on this slate. I mean, a couple of cheap guys interested in, some aces. So, let's get to 40 minutes.
So let's get right into it. Obviously, we can start with the high-end options in terms of pitching. We got a couple of those: Darvish, Bundy, Carrasco, Flaherty. We got two guys in the same game that are highly priced up there. Geoff, let's start with you, man. What's your kind of thoughts on the top end of these salaries when it comes to the starting pitchers?
Yeah, I mean, Darvish versus Flaherty is definitely an interesting matchup. I mean, Flaherty and against any other team on the slate, I mean, you'd probably be heavily considered. I mean, his price isn't the greatest maybe, and just because he's still on, I think he got up to like 85 pitches the last time out, but he's looked good. The matchup really isn't even that bad. It's just, from a favor perspective, I mean, going in as an underdog, paying up for a pitcher in that amount, it's just a little bit, it's generally not something you want to do, right? So I guess from a GPP perspective, if you're looking at Hugh Darvish, as you should be, then, you could think about him as a contrarian leverage play. I don't really think it's that bad a play either. I mean, Darvish has obviously been very good. He's going to be popular tonight. And but the thing with him is, like, he either has his stuff or he doesn't, right? Sometimes the matchup with Darvish doesn't even matter. If he's good, he's good. If he's not good, then he'll get hit around a little bit. St. Louis isn't a scary lineup at all, but they can be a little bit patient. So I would probably say Carrasco is. If I was ranking them, Carrasco probably better the number one for me, but Darvish probably a slightly better upside, and then Flaherty could throw in as like an interesting leverage spot.
Yeah, I actually have. I'm with you on Carrasco. I actually have him coming up as my top projected guy in my projections. Just looking at the top starters tool a little bit, particularly on FanDuel, I think we're getting some advantage with Flaherty. It is a tough matchup against the Cubbies, no doubt about it. But if we're looking at just the top pitchers there for the one pitcher site, he's owned about half of what he should be, according to Alex's probability of success here. He's the third ranked starter in that. I'll give that one away. But he's like right there with Carrasco as far as Alex is concerned. And then Alex has Darvish on top on both sites. So Darvish pulling a little bit of ownership, about double his probability of success on FanDuel. Don't mind it at all on DraftKings. I think we're happy to swallow it for the probability of being a top two over on DK. But Flaherty's really interesting to me. I think we can get away with him on DK too. Is just not as necessarily strong an ownership advantage over there. It's trending more toward his probability of being a top two. But I do really like the play on FanDuel over. Let's see, over since start of 2018, Cubbies are third in the league with 48 home runs against right-handed pitchers. 213 ISO, 108 WRC plus, so 8% above league average. So they're a good team against righty pitchers, but Flaherty's just nasty. He's a good strikeout artist, 29% strikeout for his career, down to 23 this year, but a little bit of a blip, I think. Getting 40% whiff on the slider and the curve, very, very solid against righties. So I think we can get to Jack Flash. I think I'm going to have some Cubs against him as well, but he's a pitcher that's ultimately earned my trust. On the other side, you said Darvish. He's been basically good and back to the old Darvish since the start of last year. I was reading a thing on one of the Cubs blogs just today, and apparently he gives a lot of credit for his changes to Trevor Bauer, the pitcher. He was text messaging with Bauer before last year, and Bauer kind of just put it in his head. He simplified it for him. He said, hey, look, you've got the best stuff in the league. Throw it over the white thing and let the guys try and beat you. And he's kind of been doing that. He's also been throwing a cutter. He brought his cutter up to 48% usage since the start of last year. Used to be about 13% usage. Dynamite pitch for him to opposite hands, sets up the heavy spin fastball, really, really killer stuff. So I really like Darvish in this spot as well. Cards are right at league average, 100 WRC plus since the start of last year, 23.7% strikeout rate against righties. So I think it's a good spot for you.
course, we got to mention that we are sponsored by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They are the most trusted name in fantasy sports. They now include CSV Edit and CSV Upload features when you're looking to play multiple lineups, make better choices. Choose Yahoo Daily Fantasy. And when we look on Yahoo, $57 for Darvish, Carlos Carrasco, $45, Flaherty, $51. You even got Zach Davies at $41. As you look at the top end of Yahoo, what sticks out to you?
So that's some interesting pricing, especially on Davies. I don't get anywhere near that kind of a projection on Davies. So he's not on my board at all, and that would surprise me if he was on many people's. Geoff, cut me off there if you've seen something with Davies that I'm not. But
no,
the other prices over there sound about right.
I cringed when you mentioned Davies for the reason I don't have any interest. Yeah, seems a little bit weird to be priced that high. Yeah.
Let me just double check to make sure I did put the right number down when I did my sheet.
No, it's 40. You're right. You're right. I checked.
Oh yeah, no, he's $41.
He's $41.
I just double checked.
Yeah.
What's Kikuchi over there? Just out of curiosity, because he's one of the big time price down.
He's cheapest. He's 25. So I mean, Kikuchi's fantastic bargain over there.
Yeah. So he's a big time spend down option across the board basically tonight. He's going to be super popular, and I would assume so over at Yahoo as well. But I think he's very, very much in play. Texas is the second worst in the league since the start of 2018. Second worst in the league with 26.3% strikeout rate against lefties. 81 WRC plus is 29th in the majors also. They've hit only 93 home runs against lefties since the start of 2018, and 28 of those are from Joey Gallo. So just not a good offense against left-handed pitching, and he's pitching great this year. He's another dude who found a cutter. He's throwing it. He never used to throw it. Maybe he threw it in Japan before coming over. I'm not sure. But he added it since last year, and it's made all the difference for him in the world. He's throwing it, getting 26% whiff on like a medium spin four-seamer because of it now. And then if he adds more spin to that four-seamer, look out, because that's going to completely change his arsenal again and make it really dynamic. But he's getting 33% whiff on the cutter and the slider, just really, really setting up the breaking stuff well. Doing really well this year, limiting power this year too.
Yeah, Mariners, minus 137 favorites right now too. So I mean, it's a pretty good spot to get a guy that cheap. As just from a favorite perspective, I'm definitely all over it. I mean, again, he's definitely highly ranked in the Awesemo stack tool, and he is going to be. I lost his ownership here. I mean, he's not. He is going to be up there. I think right now we have him projected as maybe the third chalkiest pitcher. So. A guy that though I think he's got enough upside to like consider as, on a FanDuel, like on FanDuel on a one pitcher site, I would consider him, and I would even consider like stacking with another cheap play on DraftKings. And I think it's a good enough spot. Terry went over all the good stuff, what he's doing, but just from a pure, like you look out, I mean, just the matchup and the team total for Texas and stuff like that, it looks really good.
So we talked about that today a little bit in Slack, just as far as a construction kind of a question. And just looking down the DK pricing, I don't think there's anybody within like 1,000, maybe more of him as far as a good option, a guy in a reasonable spot. I mean, just comparable guys in price-wise. Tyler Anderson, I don't want any part of him against Arizona. Dane Dunning, people are on him. I don't get a great projection. I know Alex is on him a little bit. So he'd be the immediate pivot, I think, as far as price goes. Yeah. But really, there's not a ton of options. And there are a lot of good starters that are not prohibitively expensive, like your Lance McCullers, your Flahertys, your Carrascos. So I think the double paydown might get us in trouble here unless you really drill the right bats. I was looking at it as if you're not going to Kikuchi, maybe it makes sense to do like 2 upper mid-range pay-ups as a construction. I'm just curious what you might think of that, Geoff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you could definitely do that. I mean, it's probably the safer play for sure. I mean, Dunning is definitely the other guy I was referring to. There's pretty much no one else in that range that I was referring to. Obviously, going off a little bit of Alex's own projections there, but he's looked pretty good. Like he's got good control numbers as well. Again, just looking from it, just stepping back a little bit. And looking for a big pitcher, I mean, it's minus 168 favorites. The White Sox are. So I think it's actually a pretty good spot for Dunning. I definitely agree. I think that Kikuchi is like the better play. But I wouldn't hate pairing them together tonight. I think that's viable. It's definitely like a GPP only thing. Obviously, I don't think people need to be telling that. But that's going to be like the probably more viable strategy. But I do kind of like Dunning here.
Maybe you go with your second stack to one of those ones that's a little bit lower owned. Look for those sneaky plays, because that's going to be a popular construction with the double pay down, I think, too. So a lot of people are going to be on that, and they're probably going to naturally build to the right teams, to the same teams. The optimizers are going to build toward the same teams for people using similar projection sets. So just simple pivots like that you might have to do manually or tweak something in Cruncher can make a lot of difference. Real quick, just on Dunning, just because it's amusing to me. That trade that they acquired Dunning in was the same deal that they got Lucas Giolito in and Reynaldo Lopez in. And the return to the Nationals in that deal was Adam Eaton. So for Adam Eaton, the White Sox now have 3 pieces of their rotation. Pretty good trade for the White Sox. I love the White Sox bats in this one too, by the way.
Forgot about that Adam Eaton trade. That's true.
Yeah, that's a spectacular return for you.
Yeah. Good for them.
Of course, you hear Geoff mention about the Vegas lines on this one. If you want to see what the lines are for tonight's games, you want to do a little odd shopping, go to Awesemo.com, go to Odd Shopper. You can see all the lines up there right now, so you want to check that out. Also, you mentioned about the stacks tool that we have over at Awesemo.com. By the way, that is free today. So if you're in the chat asking about who's the top stacks, whatnot, and you're not a premium member, that is free content today over at Awesemo.com. So you got to check out that. So that gives a great transition over to some of the top stacks. And I know as I was watching the NBA live before lock, which by the way, be sure to pound that thumbs up button. Let's let Josh know the MLB guys can bring in some likes here on the channel as well. But I will tell you, the teams that were coming up for me a lot were the Mets, the White Sox, even got some Mariners in there.
Yeah, I wrote up the Mariners today in my stack slants. I wasn't gonna, but it was, I was gonna land on like the White Sox were up top and they were under owned. But how often do I get to write up the Mariners? So they were looking a little bit good. They were trending up the board a decent amount. So I grabbed them, and they're still, as of my last update, they're still about like mid-range on the board, but they're basically untouched. I mean, less than half on FanDuel of what they should be, quote unquote, should be less than that even on DraftKings. So I think they're in a good little spot here. They've got. Excuse me, I missed the kid's name that they're facing, but he's not much of a pitcher. Excuse me. Geoff, take it away.
Sorry, for sure. No,
I was trying to say that.
What is his name now? Kyle Cody. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle Cody.
Yeah, but I like it. I mean, especially the lefty bats of the Mariners, 100% in play. I mean, Seager, I like that. I mean, and like, I don't think any of these guys are projecting for high ownership. So I know Terry was just talking about, if you're looking for, you want to get off popular stacks, or if you think your pitcher duo is going to be overly chalky. And I mean, I think throwing a few Mariners in there isn't a bad idea at all. I mean, just getting their lineup up here, like, they don't have lineups up yet, but, sure. I mean, yeah, Seager, JP Crawford, I think leading off is fine. They don't have like a ton of bats. It's maybe not a team I would, you probably even could do a 1 through 5 or like something like that tonight though. So get Lewis and Seager in there for sure. And at the very least, you'd have a good mini stack. So I like it. I think even there, I was actually looking for their team total and I can't find it either, but it's decent tonight. I know it's decent enough that it made me kind of consider them as well. So definitely like Seager anyways. He's projecting a low ownership.
Yeah, Seager, good bat in there. And Kyle Lewis, like you mentioned, dynamite rookie prospect coming up and, really making some noise this year. He's a name that would have been on like that Louis Robert type level if he hadn't blown out his knee and had a couple other injuries in the minors. So dynamite kid, he's going, as of my last update, under 1% owned on DraftKings. So you can grab a sneaky little, just even if it's a 3-man, Crawford, Lewis, Seager up at the top of that lineup. There's not a ton that I like in that lineup, and it's actually not even as good a lineup as the one that I wrote up it was the projected lineup. So, be careful with it, but grab Lewis and the 2 lefties and, maybe roll a small one out there with the Mariners.
Yeah, just kind of looking at our top stack tool, as I mentioned, it is free today, so you want to check that out. As I kind of look at some of the lower end options in terms of that stack tool, because I'm always looking to be contrarian in some way. I know on the strategy show we talked about Cleveland, but you do got to pay up for Cleveland. They're down there as well. maybe if you want to play the Cardinals thinking, hey, maybe this is going to be the game where Darvish does not have his A-plus stuff, maybe look at the Cardinals as well.
Tough ask on the Cards for me. They're kind of too league average-ish, and I just give Darvish too much credit. And he's got such good strikeout stuff, and it was 30.8% strikeout this year so far. He's only walking 4.7% of hitters. So I don't know. He's not a guy that puts a ton of guys on base. So even if they do connect with a home run, it's a solo shot, a 2-run homer, not going to do a ton of damage. So I don't really expect it to go running around the bases a lot. What I do like on the Cards is the price. I mean, you can get to basically anything with those guys on both sites. The only expensive bat on either site is Goldschmidt on DK at $5,000. Everybody else is in $4,200 or lower range over there, and significantly cheaper than that, of course, on FanDuel. So you can do some interesting things with these bats for sure. I don't mind that at all. You can take a Goldschmidt, Edman, Brad Miller, and a DeJong out of the middle of that lineup, throw them up against Darvish if you wanted to. Again, not the greatest spot in the world. The spot I like better that's in kind of a mid-range that's really getting ignored, and there were a team I wrote up last night was the A's. I think the A's are in an interesting spot here. Geoff, do you have any love for the A's? They're like middle of the board on the stacks tool, but going significantly under-owned on DK.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. I mean, because we were kind of making fun of Zach Davies earlier, right? I mean, the only thing that didn't really have me that I didn't really like about the A's is they don't have a ton of left-handed bats. I mean, you got Matt Olson in there, obviously, but I get Tommy La Stella actually looks like he's hitting second, so that's actually pretty good. That's actually 2 in the top 5, so that's not bad. Yeah, I kind of like that play as well. I mean, again, they didn't really make my top stacks, but Jason brought up the fact we're talking like looking for contrarian plays. I was looking at the other side of this game too, but I don't think San Diego is necessarily a team I'd want to stack more as just take a guy like Tatis or Machado for a one-off, just because they look like they're projecting low ownership. But yeah, from a 1 to 5 stack, I would actually prefer taking the A's in this spot as well. I mentioned, I'd prefer to get exposure to those lefties, but Davies really, he's pretty good at limit, or he's been good so far in the year at limiting damage, but doesn't mean that can't turn. A's don't strike out much. They can definitely get to pitchers early and stuff like that. So, I kind of see the appeal there. Like I said, it would be a lot more attractive. They had like maybe one more lefty bat in there, but I kind of like the just 1 through 5 now that I'm looking at it.
Yeah, and I was looking at him when I was writing them up last night, and you mentioned La Stella off the top. They got him from the Angels just the other day. Very good lefty bat. What I love for that he does is he gets on base very well. That's a definite tool for him. So sitting him up at the top of that lineup, no Semien tonight, so we've got Ramon Laureano leading off ahead of him. But the two of them get on base a decent amount. Laureano's at 375 clip for the season, La Stella at 361. So you got a good pair of bats hitting in front of the big bashers in Chapman, Callahan, and Olsen there. The righties on this team also, just looking through their splits over the last couple of years, they hit right-handed pitching pretty well from what I was seeing. I don't remember them off the top of my head. I should have collected them, but if everybody wants to see them, it's all in my quick hits column from last night. But I like a lot of what this team can do. And then they've got sneaky options, especially on DK. Sean Murphy at the bottom of the lineup, 0.6% ownership as a catcher play at only 3,900. He's not crushing the back of the baseball card stats. He's got a 203 batting average, a 321 on base, a 333 slugging percentage. But he's in like the 98th percentile of hard hit rate, like the 94th percentile of average exit velo. So he's a guy who's just been smoking the ball when he makes contact. We've said similar things about Gary Sanchez in the past as a catcher option, who when he hits the ball, it goes. And we could get similar production as a very, very sneaky, very cheap catcher play out of Murphy at the bottom of this lineup too. So if you're building A stacks, I wouldn't leave him out completely over there. Just looking at the stacks tool, any others that really popped out for you, Geoff, as far as either under-owned or maybe spots that looked like over-owned that you didn't like?
Yeah, so I mean, the Mets probably. I mean, the Mets are kind of always live, but I was surprised that they were getting up to like the second chalkiest there. Texas was strange as well to be up that high. A team I have a little bit of interest in. Actually, I'm a little bit surprised they're even up this high, but maybe I shouldn't. Maybe that's why I like them. Is actually the Diamondbacks. So going up against, I just like the pitching matchup there. Going up against in San Francisco. So And that's the other thing. Like San Francisco, we typically think of as a pure pitcher's park. It's been better this year as far as just benefiting the bats instead. Tyler Anderson. It's going to be the third straight time that he's faced the Diamondbacks too, which I like that. Like I just really feel like whenever you get a pitcher going up against a team like multiple times, it always favors the bats. And I want to say the first time he did really good, and the second time I'm pretty sure he got hit up a bit. So he doesn't have any real, like, he doesn't have outstanding numbers. His walk rate is getting close to 10, and yeah, I like this. I mean, they have some really solid right-handed bats. I know that's the D-backs, and they kind of always like look good, and they just don't really perform that well all the time. But I think this is kind of a good spot for them. They're projecting, like, I mean, it's more of just what a play I like than anything just from projections. But I think it's a good spot for them. So that was kind of my other contrarian play. They're not going to be. I don't think they're going to be super low owned or anything like that, like dirt, like 2% owned, but definitely off the top stacks, you'll get better ownership.
Yeah. And look, I think that's a reasonably good play. I think it's a killer matchup against Anderson for sure. Yeah. The one thing he does discernibly well is keep the ball on the ground, but even then he puts them, he leaves it up and it goes. So I get good projections 1 through 5 in this lineup. They are, no longer have Starlin Marte. They in an odd trade sent him to the Marlins after the Marlins sent other guys out. But they still got a pretty good lineup with Ketel Marte, Christian Walker, Eduardo Escobar, Colt Calhoun. You could grab a little stack there and be all right with it. And then the other side of this one is actually another one that I wrote up this afternoon. I had a double very strange teams going with the Giants and the Mariners in my stacks lines today. And I think this Giants lineup rather could do some damage here. You mentioned how the park has been playing all year. EMAC's been talking about that all year long, how it's been playing like a new course field. So who knows if that's a blip, if that's something real with the changes they've made or with what they might be doing with the Bulls this year. But there's no arguing with the production of this team. They've been pretty good. Yaz is super expensive at $5,700 on DraftKings off the top. He's having a great year, but that is an unjustifiable price for a guy who was a 29-year-old rookie last year. 298, 411, 603 slash so far with 8 home runs this year. But again, he's not worth that money. But if you can afford it, build him into your stack. But I like the Dickerson, Longoria, Belt, Flores, Solano stretch here. I think you can get something out of Crawford. And then Joey Bart is another guy who's like a sneaky DraftKings catcher play. He's 6.1% ownership, 3,800. But another guy who's just a very good pedigree. 60 grade power in traditional scouting, was 20 some odd home runs, I believe, over 2 levels of the minors last year, or just under 20. So good catcher option for a little sneaky pop there.
Yeah. All right, fellas, I'm back, by the way. The good old Florida 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon thunderstorm just knocking the power off. Yeah, I'm sitting here and all I can tell you guys freeze. I'm like, oh, there goes power.
Don't worry, we only left 5-6 minutes of dead air sitting there while we.
So what I think the last time we were talking about the Cardinals. So what did I miss? So I know I'm not asking you about something y'all have already talked about.
I think we breezed past the Cards. We agree we weren't really in love with the spot against Darvish. Maybe pick off a one-off or something in there. And then we hopped over. We hit on Oakland as a good stack. And then we touched on the D-backs here. Geoff mentioned the Mets, who I think are a very good stack. We kind of breezed by the White Sox up top earlier, and maybe it merits circling back to because they're just a killer option. I mean, they're the best offensive baseball, really. And up against Brady Singer today, dicey. The kid's a ground ball specialist who, when he leaves the ball up in the zone, it just sits there. And home run hitters like these are going to have a field day with that if that happens against this kid. So I really, really like the power marks on the White Sox. They're super expensive and hard to build with. So this is going to be a team that I think a lot of people use that Kikuchi-Dunning combo and immediately start putting White Sox in their lineup. I think they're one of the best options to do that with, of course. They're on the slate, second on the slate in slugging percentage, third in ISO, second in WRC plus out of all your options on the slate, third in hard hit rate. The teams ahead of them are the Dodgers and the Padres and all of those categories. So they're kind of the obvious teams, and the White Sox are the one that's going under-owned all the way at the top of the board out of those. So maybe grab yourself some White Sox and just ride the pricing if you can make it work.
Yeah, the only thing I have written down about the White Sox, I mean, they're obviously a great play. Singer looks like he's a lot weaker against lefties. It does suck because who's sitting out again? One of their big hitters is sitting out. Anyways, but at the same time, you can play righties against him too. So, you can go with like a mini stack because Terry mentioned again that, these guys are expensive, right? It's Grandal is sitting out, sorry. So, which kind of sucks because it would have been a great matchup for him, but you can still get to Mankato there, who's hitting second, and just even doing a mini stack with him, Tim Anderson, and you could throw Abreu in there, or you could go cheaper and leave him out, or go Encarnacion. So I like that. I like paying up here because you're going to get lower ownership. So definitely a good spot. It sucks that Grandal's not playing. This would have been a really good spot to use him in like a 2 or 3 man stack. But yeah, absolutely. I know one of the notes I had was try and pay up for them just because it'll be probably a little bit contrarian.
Yeah, for sure. Sneaky lefty bat in that lineup late in the outfield. Lefty bat, Nomar Mazara. 6.3% ownership projection on DK, 6.3 on FanDuel. So lefty power, a lot of lefty power. A guy who could maybe replace Grandal in your heart today. Not getting a lot of lefty power so far this year, by the way. No home runs, but it's in there. We've seen it.
By the way, we're 10 minutes before lock, and of course, I've mentioned about how the top stack tool is today's free premium content on Awesemo.com. If you want to sign up for an Awesemo Plus weekly pass, go to Awesemo.com/join to sign up for a weekly pass for $15.95. So you have access to player projections, ownership projections, and that top pitchers tool. One of the pitchers, and I know there's been some questions in the chat about this one, is Burns going for the Brewers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Burns is a good pitcher. He's in a tricky spot against the Indians. The Indians are a pretty good lineup overall, but looking into some of the numbers since the start of 2018, they're 10th in the league with 333 home runs against right-handed pitching. But their WRC plus is actually 6% below average, which surprised me a little bit. So far in 2020, they are at 22.7% strikeout rate against righty pitchers, which is up a little bit over the last since the start of 2018. They're at 21.8%, which is 8th overall in the league, so pretty good. But striking out a little bit more against righties. But I do like the spot for Burns. He's a 29.1% career strikeout rate, 166 career home run per 9. So you got to watch out for the long ball a little bit to both hands. He's given up around 1.6 to both. 4.57 xFIP for his career to lefties, 2.91 to righties. So overall, he's better quality against same-handed hitters. Throws the sinker 36% of the time, try to keep the ball on the ground, set up the breaking stuff. Heavy whiff on limited amount of sliders and four-seamers, 32% on a cutter. So pretty decent arsenal, good stack-ass numbers. I like Burns.
He's a good pitcher, for sure. I mean, he's definitely started well. I feel like possibly the last show we did, I think it was last week where we talked him up, and he came through with like a massive game. It's just the matchup, right? I mean, Cleveland doesn't strike out much. It's a tough matchup for any pitcher. So, if you're using them, it's more of just maybe you're doing it to do, just to pay down a pitching and use them with one of like Dunny or Kikuchi, maybe. I don't mind that play in GPPs. It is, I'm not sure what the upside is with him necessarily against the Indians, but you look at the other options there. I mean, you got Luzardo. I don't know. I mean, all these guys are kind of in a similar spot, like McCullers, and it's not like the greatest matchup. So, yeah, I mean, why not just play the guy who's playing well? I don't hate it. He's like Terry said, he's playing well. He's a good pitcher. It's just, it's a really tough matchup that you're taking on. So, ideally, you probably steer away from it, but you're mixing in a bunch of lineups for sure.
And you bring up an interesting guy in Luzardo there, or like a Dylan Bundy. Luzardo, a little bit less expensive than Burns. Bundy, a lot more expensive than Burns. Both getting significantly more ownership. So as just a pivot play, if you're looking at one of those guys, you can say, all right, I'm going to save some money. And Alex has them projected. Alex has Burns 0.2 DraftKings points behind Bundy. So you save a significant amount of money, you save on ownership, and then you can spend an additional $2,400 on bats. So split that, so you get two $1,200 bat upgrades. That's pretty significant on DK. So you might want to look at that if you're planning on rolling out some Bundy. Maybe switch it over, roll out some Burns, similar spot, similar matchup. Save a lot of money, save some ownership.
He's definitely going to be lower owned than Luzardo too. So projected to be. So from the pivot there, absolutely makes sense.
By the way, if you got a last minute question, be sure to put that either in our premium Slack account or on YouTube. We'll get to those questions. A question that I saw a little earlier in terms of a stack was whether it was a preference on the Mets or the Angels.
I mean, all things considered, it would have to be, you're taking the Mets there. I think in most cases, Angels, I didn't really look at the Angels much today, to be honest. I don't really have that much to say about them. Going up against McCullers, he has been bad on the road. It's just not really a team that popped out to me for any reason. So maybe Terry has something to say on the Angels, but for me, even if the Mets are going to be a little bit chalky, they would pretty much be, I would rather just take them. So maybe I missed some.
Yeah,
maybe there's some.
I would play the Mets twice before I played the Angels on this slate. I'm not sure where that was coming from. Just looking at my projections, there's 3 hitters that I like in that lineup, and you know who they are: Mike Trout, Anthony Rendon, Shohei Ohtani. Everybody else in that lineup. Franklin Barreto is a guy who's a reasonable prospect from a little while back, but not really anything special right now at the major league level. Nobody's going to be really on them outside of like Trout. So if you wanted to be really, really different, that would be a good route to go. Don't like the matchup against McCullers at all. I don't really care that he hasn't been great on the road. That was 3 starts. One of them was that wacky Arizona game where they opened the roof and he immediately gave up 8 runs. The other 2, he gave up 4 in each of them. So, it's not like he's getting lit up every time he goes on the road, and we're talking about a 3-game sample size. This is Lance McCullers. This is a bad Angels lineup that just lost Listella off the top. They're big table setters. So, the Angels are not in play for me at all.
Of course, if you're still in here, be sure to hit that thumbs up button on YouTube. Really does help us out. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you know when we're live. Blake asks, he goes, is Dunning viable as a cash game option if I use the Big Sox bats?
Geoff, you want to talk the cash game there?
You can use the Sox bats and not use Dunning. I don't think you necessarily have to correlate them in a cash game. But sure, you're probably taking on a little bit more variance, obviously, because if Dunning busts and they lose, then. But Kikuchi is probably a safer option, is what I'm trying to say. For a cash game, if you're forcing me to choose, I would go there. I do like Dunning in this spot for a couple reasons I've already laid out, but it's really close. Kikuchi though is to me like the better long-term pitcher. He's in a slightly better spot with slightly better matchup. We know more about him. I just think from this year what he's going to bring. Dunning is probably a little bit more raw. Probably just a little bit more chance of combusting. Tougher matchups. So those are kind of things that in a cash game, you usually go with the guy who's got the better matchup, and we know a little bit more. That's the difference between GPPs and cash. So for me, it would be UC. But if you want to take a shot with Dunning, I definitely don't like him enough to say no. He's definitely not cash game viable. But just at that price, I'm talking specifically DK. Yeah, it's still UC for me, Kikuchi.
Of course, we're about 3 minutes away before lock. So if you do have any of those last minute questions, be sure to chime that in. I know we talked about the Giants. And I know EMAC loves that stadium now. And me and Greg were talking about the strategy show, and Greg kind of isn't totally all in on buying that it's becoming this hitters park. Obviously, it's a better hitters park than what it was. But what's kind of you mentioned about Joey Bart. The only thing I don't like about him in that spot, he's in the 8-hole, and I'm always worried about maximizing at bats.
Yeah, and that's something that, I talk about wraparounds and late lineup plays a lot, but typically when I'm doing that, everybody needs to be aware that I'm talking about plays that we're accepting the fact that we're sacrificing a plate appearance as part of that. So you've got to really be aware of that. You've got to be aware of what the upside looks like, and you've got to do it with the right kind of bats. You've got to do it with a guy who's got 2 home run upside in 4 plate appearances. You've got to do it with somebody who's getting on base 3 out of 4 times and setting the table and scoring 2 runs for the guys at the top of the lineup and acting as a secondary leadoff hitter the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th times through that lineup. So it's very important to keep that in mind. That's a great point, Jace, as far as what the bottom of the lineup actually delivers for you as far as opportunity cost. And if you have similar plays, similar pivots, a guy with, the exact same level of ownership, same price, same upside, but he's hitting 5th as opposed to the guy hitting 9th, probably a better idea to play the guy hitting 5th, just in a vacuum.
Yeah. I think Bart's a good candidate, though, for a guy you would target at the back end, right? I mean, good matchup. It depends what you think of the park. I tend to think I would agree with what Ehrenberg threw out there, that San Francisco is turning into a hitter's park, and we should embrace it. So all those things, kind of would lead him to being, I think, a good late option. And yeah.
Of course, go ahead.
No, I was just going to throw out, what do we think about the Astros against Bundy as just like a wacky kind of, they're a good hitting team. They've got a good lineup. They're not that expensive, especially on FanDuel for them, but pretty cheap on DK as well, given the matchup. I mean, Bundy, we've seen him give up tons and tons of homers over the last couple of years, but he's a different pitcher now in LA. But what do you think of the spot, Geoff? I was wrestling with what to do with that one.
I mean, like their team total is 4.65, I think. So it's one of the higher marks out there. I mean, it's the Astros, whenever you can get them, when people are just kind of sleeping on them, it's pretty good. The lefties, I think, again, if I was looking at this lineup too against Dylan Bundy, definitely would lean lefties. Like if you're looking to just pick guys out there, Michael Brantley for sure, Tucker, I think he's playing. So, I don't know. You could definitely go just with a huge Houston stack here. I mean, I know early in the day, I'm like, yeah, it's just one of those teams you should consider. They're not projecting out as like super low owned, though. I guess that's maybe the one knock against them. So I'd probably prefer them as just like a couple one-offs with a guy like Brantley. So, but definitely against Bundy, like, the lefties, I think are pretty good plays actually. So. I'm not like a huge Dylan Bundy fan.
Ownership in there, like Correa at 1.5, Yuli at 1.1, Reddick at 2.7. So you can grab some sneakiness and make it unique and different. I think we passed lock already, though, so you can't do that anymore.
So it doesn't matter.
Of course, we have reached lock, guys. So good luck to everyone tonight. Hopefully you can make that big money on whatever platform you're playing on. Of course, be sure to check out our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They have CSV upload, CSV edit. So make better choices. Choose Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. So that is going to wrap it up for today's MLB Live Before Lock. Of course, be sure to keep it locked here at Awesemo.com as we got you covered for every sport there is.